Joshua chapter 2 on our trek through the book. Good morning, ladies. So we're in Joshua chapter 2. Remember, Joshua sends in two spies. Israel is in a place called Shittim. They've been there for a few months, probably 3 or 4 months. They're prepared to cross the Jordan River finally to go into the land of Canaan. And Joshua has sent in two spies. He wants to recon the area. He wants to know what's going on there, wants to know how the people's attitudes are in the cities that he is going to go into. But no one knows about the spies. Remember last time we ended in this, right about in this area where Joshua sent in the spies secretly. Only Joshua knew the spies were going in. He certainly didn't want a knee-jerk reaction from the Jews, his fellow countrymen, like happened 40 years earlier when Joshua was a spy himself and went in to spy out the land of Canaan. Remember, this is what Jericho looks like now. It's called the City of Palms in the Bible. I showed you a verse last time where Jericho is called the City of Palms, date palms. Still have palm trees in the city today. This is where it is on a map, just so we can get started again and get an orientation to the nation of Israel. This is where we are down here in the bottom. You can see all this darkness is mountains. All these mountains, hills. This Jericho is in the foothills going up to the mountains that Jerusalem is in. But we're in this plain right here, the valley, the Jordan River Valley. And we're right in here somewhere. This is where the Jews are, about to cross and stop here and then march into Jericho. So that's where we find ourselves. The spies, as we saw last time, they arrive in Jericho. They're quickly found out. The men of Jericho quickly find out, identify these spies as two Jews. They go to the king, and the king sends word to the woman named Rahab. Now remember, Rahab was a prostitute. She was a prostitute. The Bible calls her a harlot. And so the men have been hidden by Rahab to protect them. And because Rahab, we see Genesis 12:3, I'll bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. We see it play out right here. Rahab has a choice to make. And Rahab decides to hide the spies to protect the Jews, to bless Israel. And so as we'll see this morning, God is going to bless Rahab by showing her mercy and keeping her alive in Jericho. Rahab also, not only does she hide the spies, but she gives valuable intel to the two spies about the people in Jericho. Look what it says in verse 11. In Joshua chapter 2, verse 11. These are Rahab's words about her own countrymen, her own citizens of Jericho. It says, for when we heard about what the Lord had done for you previously, when we heard it, our hearts melted and no courage remained in any man. So the men who would be the warriors in Jericho are terrified of Israel and Israel's God, Yahweh. That's good intelligence for an army that's about to go in and try to take these people militarily. No courage remained in any man any longer because of you. And here she gives the reason why the fear. They're not afraid of Israel. They're afraid of Israel's God. It says at the end of verse 11, for Yahweh your God, the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth below. So Rahab, as we saw last time, believes in the God of Israel. She worships the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Maybe not very clearly yet. She probably doesn't know much, but she knows what God has done for Israel. And she knows that Yahweh is the one true God, and that all those false gods of Egypt and all the other places aren't real gods. In case you missed last week, I want to show you this one more time. An important fact about this Gentile woman prostitute named Rahab. Look what it says in Matthew chapter 1, verse 5. Now we move from the Old Testament 1,500 years forward into the New Testament, and we have this Jesus. We have Jesus of Nazareth who has come to earth. And so Matthew starts his gospel by giving a genealogy of Jesus. Who is he? Where did he come from on earth? Whose family line is he in? Is he qualified to be the king of Israel? Is he from the tribe of Judah? Is he a son of David? That's why you have the genealogy in Matthew 1 and in Luke chapter 3. But in Matthew chapter 1, you see Rahab's name. It says Solomon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. That means Solomon was the husband of Rahab, and their child's name was Boaz. This is in the genealogy, the lineage of Jesus, your Savior, a Gentile prostitute, a God-fearing woman from the city of Jericho who blessed Israel on this day by hiding the spies. So Solomon married this prostitute Rahab. They had Boaz. Boaz married who? Well, it says right there, Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth. Ruth, remember in the book of Ruth, the Moabitess, another Gentile woman. Interesting, did you know there were Gentiles in the line of the perfect Jew, Jesus Christ? There are at least two right there. Two women, Rahab and Ruth. And then Obed, their son, was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David, King David. And as you go down the line, you eventually get to Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ. I say that because Rahab here is a very, very important figure in the Bible. She's a Gentile believer in Yahweh. She's a faithful believer in Yahweh. We saw her in Matthew chapter 11, by faith, Rahab. So another fantastic woman, female figure in the Scripture in the person of Rahab. So Rahab, the Gentile from Jericho, the prostitute, is a direct ancestor of Jesus Christ. She is the great, however many greats, grandmother of Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ. This Rahab that we're reading about in the book of Joshua chapter 2. One more thought. I shared this last time, but as we get going again, Rahab had all the same facts concerning the God of Israel that everybody in Jericho had. And I say that because look at how Rahab responded to Yahweh. She knows what Yahweh has done at the Red Sea, how He dried up the sea and Israel crossed on dry ground. She's heard the story of the military battles that Israel has had with Sihon and Og. So she's heard all the same things that everybody in her city has, yet Rahab bows the knee to Yahweh in worship, and the rest of the city is disobedient and doesn't want any part of this worship of Yahweh. Same exact facts, totally different conclusions. Totally different conclusions. The rest of Jericho, as she says here, although they're terrified of Yahweh, they're terrified of Israel's God, Yahweh, they were disobedient, as Hebrews chapter 11 says, and would not worship Him as God. They were into their pantheon of false gods, and they were worshiping all their false gods, sacrificing to all their false gods. And this is the reason that Yahweh had decided their fate. What would happen to all the people of the city of Jericho? Remember back in Deuteronomy chapter 20, look what it says. In chapter 20, verse 16, God gives instruction to Israel about what to do when they finally do cross the river Jordan. And He says, only in the cities of these people, Jericho is one of those cities. In the cities of these people that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, you shall not leave anything alive that breathes. Kill everything. Man, woman, child, beast, everything that breathes air. Cleanse the land. This isn't an angry God. This is a just God. And these people won't worship me, but Rahab will. So the question is, when God says, in the cities of these people, and make no mistake, Jericho is one of these cities, God says, do not leave anything alive that breathes. So the question that jumps out immediately, at least to me, is, does God ever make exceptions? Is there an exception to be made in that statement? Do not leave anything alive that breathes. Does God make exceptions? Does God show mercy to whom He will show mercy? To who He chooses to show mercy? Does He show grace to people that He chooses to show grace to? Does God honor in humanity people that worship Him? What's the answer? Yes. Yes, God shows mercy. God gives mercy to whom He will give mercy. God tells Israel, when you go into these cities, kill everything that breathes. They're not God worshipers. They don't fall on their knee to me. They fall on their knee to all these false gods. It's time. I've given them 400 years of grace. It's time for them to go. But what about Rahab? Does not kill Rahab. Although He said, don't leave anything alive that breathes. So yes, God does make exceptions. The exception in this story's name is Rahab, and her father and her mother and her brothers and her sisters, as we're about to see. Verse 12 says, now therefore, Rahab continues talking. Rahab in verse 11 says, everybody in our city, all the men are terrified of you Israelis. They're terrified of the Jewish nation. They're terrified of your God. But now she says, because I know that your God is the only God, and that your God has already decreed, He's already decided that all the cities in the land of Canaan will be yours. He's given you our city. She has to enter into a deal. She pleads for her life, is what she does. So now, therefore, please swear to me by Yahweh. She wants them to make an oath to her based on the name of Yahweh. Swear to me by your God, since I have dealt kindly with you, that you also will deal kindly with my father's house and give me a pledge of truth. So Rahab is pleading for her life, knowing that any day now, that mass of 2 million people, that horde, is going to cross the Jordan River and they will own my city. It is theirs. Yahweh has decreed it. And so she says, have mercy on me. I've dealt kindly with you. You please deal kindly with me. An interesting word, a favorite of everyone's, is this word, chesed, C-H-E-S-E-D. And that's the word that we have translated deal kindly or dealt kindly. Rahab is saying, I have shown you chesed. You show me chesed in return. What does this word mean? It means loyalty, yes, but it means more than that. It means loyal, steadfast, or faithful love based on a promise or agreement or a covenant. This is the word that God uses when He enters into His agreements or covenants with Israel. You see this word in the Old Testament translated loving kindness. Most of the places you'll see it in the New King James or the New American Standard, it'll be translated loving kindness. God shows His loving kindness to Israel. And that's this word chesed. It's a love that's based on an agreement that we've made. It's a loyal covenant love. And so Rahab is entering into a covenant, an agreement with these two Jews. I have treated you well and spared your lives. She could have handed them over to the king, right? But she has treated them well and spared their lives, and she's asking for her life to be spared in return. But not only for hers, look what it says in verse 13, and spare my father. I love this woman. Not just looking out for herself. Spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters with all who belong to them. So the in-laws, her nieces, her nephews, her entire family, and deliver our lives from death. That's what she's asking for. In return for the lives of these two spies, she wants that everybody related to her in that city, she wants them to come out and not be killed, because she knows this city will be destroyed. We're going to be taken over. It's just a matter of time, that's all. So, again, I want to back up just for a second to paint this picture of Rahab just for a second. She had choices. Rahab was given an order from the king. If you back up just a moment in your minds, remember that these two spies were found out very quickly. And men went to the king and told them, you've got 2 Jews in your city. What are you going to do? And the king sends men to Rahab's house to bring the men out. He sends Jericho's citizens to Rahab's house to get these 2 Jews, these 2 spies. So Rahab has an order, a standing order from her king, give up the 2 men. But she was not afraid of her king. Her fear wasn't towards the king. She was afraid of Yahweh, the king of the universe, the God of Israel. Another thing about Rahab, to point out is that Yahweh, God, didn't come to her in a dream or in a vision. Rahab doesn't have any angelic messenger that comes to her and tells her what to do. Rahab has facts that God has made sure that she knows. She's on her own with the facts, just like everybody else in Jericho is on their own with the facts. She knows who this God was. She has the information about how God has dealt with Egypt on Israel's behalf. She knows these things. Word has gotten out about how Yahweh has protected Israel. So she has what we call today, the Word of God. In her day, it was oral. She understood the truths of God because the stories were passed to her orally. She understood about the Red Sea. She understood about the victory of Sihon and Og. She understood how Israel was defeating giants because their God led the way. So in her day, again, it's the word of mouth. She had the truth about Yahweh and Israel, and she made a decision. In our day, we get this same information about God and make our decisions based on this book. In her day, it wasn't written down, it wasn't in black leather, but just as clearly it was the truth about God, and she had to make a decision. She was free to make a decision. Do I fear the king and give up Israel, knowing that that's an impossibility with their God? He's already given them this city. Or do I fear God and risk my life and protect the Jews? And that's exactly what she did. No special dream. I'm sending you 2 Jews. You are to hide them on the roof. I will protect you. No special dream, no special vision. A woman of great faith in Yahweh. And that's why this woman, Rahab, makes the Hebrews chapter 11 hall of faith. She chose to fear the God of Israel, to believe in His communication to men on earth, to respond to the miracles that He had made known to her, and made the choice, Israel over my fellow citizens of Jericho. I stand with Israel. A lot to learn from this woman, Rahab. Quickly, she feared God. What does it mean to fear God? We go over this a lot. I just want to show it to you again in case you haven't seen it or forget these facts. She was a God-fearing woman. What does it mean to fear God but to reverence Him as sovereign? The one who makes the rules, the high king of Israel, one who exercises supreme authority is what sovereign means. It's a royal word. It means He's the king over all kings. So to fear God is to reverence Him, to show Him respect as the king over all kings. Only God has the right to rule His creation, and that includes mankind. So God has made the decree that the city of Jericho and all the land of Canaan will belong to Israel. Rahab knows it. And she says, God is in control. I know you're going to kill everybody in my city. I'm pleading for my life and the life of my family. This is Rahab. She's a God-fearer. She trusts Him implicitly. She's not afraid of the king who will kill her if she lies to him. She's afraid of Yahweh, who will kill her, because leave nothing that breathes alive, who will kill her if she doesn't risk her life to save the Jews. What a predicament the woman's in. Dies either way. At the hand of the king if she lies, at the hand of Yahweh, the King of Kings, if she doesn't lie. Doesn't hide the spies, doesn't protect Israel. What a predicament the woman's in. But she trusts Yahweh implicitly. What else does it mean to fear God? To obey Him without question. You've sent me Jews, I'll protect them. Why did you send them to me? I didn't want this trouble. But at the same time, my goodness, Lord, why did you send them to me? I'm a prostitute. I don't deserve your grace. I don't deserve your mercy. Why would you send these two men to me? Why would you give me the opportunity to plead for my life? But that's exactly what He did for Rahab. What a God and what a woman. She obeyed Him without question. She hid the spies on her roof. What does it also mean to fear God but to fear Him? Trembling fear. You don't mess with God. God will not be mocked, according to the book of James. Do not be deceived. God will not be mocked. He's not a God to be toyed with. So there is a part of fearing God which is not just respect and reverence, but fear for what He can do. And that is what's going on in Rahab's heart right there. Back in the text in verse 14, Rahab tells these two spies, I've dealt lovingly and loyally with you, faithfully to God. Please protect me. So the men respond and they say, our life for yours. You've spared our lives, we will spare your lives. So our life for yours, if you don't tell this business of ours. So there's some stipulations to the agreement. Rahab just says, save me. The men says, okay, we'll save you. But there are three stipulations that we're about to see here. So they say, our life for your lives. They agree. They agree that they will save her life if you don't tell this business of ours, and it shall come about when the Lord gives us the land, because He will, just like you said, Rahab, we are coming and no one can stop us. When the Lord gives us the land, that we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. We will save your life and the lives of your family just as you've asked. So what does Rahab do? She let them down by a rope through the window. For her house was on the city wall, so that she was living on the wall. Now you hear a lot of accounts of the walls of Jericho and the city of Jericho, what it may have looked like. But it's clear, and archaeologists have found the ruins of Jericho. They've found rubble that wasn't torn down, but seems to have just collapsed under its own weight when the foundation slid out and everything just fell, which is exactly what happens. But let me tell you one thing that we do know about the walls of Jericho. They were about 15 feet apart. So it was a double-walled city. You had an outer wall of these stones, and then you had about a 15-foot space, which is about from me to the wall, and then you had a second wall. And so it's in this 15-foot area that they had houses and places to live all around the city, and Rahab lived in one of those areas between the walls. She lived along the wall. She lived in the walls, it says. Between the outer wall and that inner wall in that 15-foot area is where Rahab did her business as a prostitute. And so her house was on the city wall, it says in verse 13, so that she was living on the wall. And so this is what she says to the men to further protect their lives. It wasn't enough that she hid them on a roof. They're still in danger because men are looking for them. So she says to them, go to the hill country, so that the pursuers, the men of Jericho, so that the pursuers will not find you, basically, will not happen upon you, and hide yourselves there for 3 days until the pursuers return to Jericho. So they are going to go out of Jericho and they're going to try to find you. If you go this way, they'll never find you. Go to the hill country and hide there, and after 3 days, you may go back across the river. And here in verse 17, we see the stipulations to the agreement. We'll save your lives, Rahab, but you must do these things. In verse 17, the men, these two spies, The men said to her, we shall be free from this oath to you. We shall be free from this oath to you, which you have made us swear, unless, here are the stipulations, if you don't do these three things, then our promise to you is null and void. We can't help you if you don't help us help you. That's the point here. And this is what they need from her. In verse 18, when we come into the land, because we're coming, Rahab, when we come into the land, that's all Israel, the first stipulation is you tie this cord of scarlet thread in the window through which you let us down. Now, the walls of Jericho, we don't know whether they look like anything like what you see on the screen there, but we know there were walls and we know there was a gate. And it was a big city. So there was a lot of wall and a lot of windows. And how in the world could these two spies ever know, oh, it was that window? They would never know where this woman was. So there are some stipulations. You have to identify your window. You've got to put this red, scarlet means red, you've got to put this red string, this red thread, and hang it out your window so that we come around, we see the red, we know we'll save you. That's your house. There's another stipulation. It says in verse 18, and gather to yourself into the house. We will save who's ever in the house, but you have to get them into the house. So she says, gather to yourself into the house your father and your mother and your brothers and all your father's household. The in-laws, the nieces, the nephews, the grandkids, whoever you want to save, get them inside this house. They have to be related. These aren't friends, this is family. And then they say, it shall come about that anyone who goes out of the doors, anyone who goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head. We shall be free. So if your brother-in-law gets a wild idea to go outside and look around Jericho and he gets killed, his blood, he took his life into his own hands. There is salvation nowhere but inside the house. Does that remind you of anything? Recent Jewish history. There's salvation nowhere but inside the house. You must be inside the house and paint the blood on the doorsteps and the lintels. Only inside the house is salvation found. It's reminiscent of the Passover event. It shall come about that anyone who goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood is on his own head, we shall be free. But anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head if a hand is laid on him. If there's someone who's in your house when Israel comes in here and they die, then you can take our lives. These spies are putting their lives in place of people they don't even know. If someone gets killed inside the house, again, a life for a life, we'll give our lives for theirs. So inside the house was safety. Outside the house, death. Inside the house, safety was promised. Outside the house, death is promised. Because Israel is going to kill everything that breathes. Unless you're inside this one house where the window has a scarlet thread running outside of it. Remember again, only in the cities of these people that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, you shall not leave anything alive that breathes. There's only one place that's safe, inside this house. And again, the spies would never know because of the size of the city and the size of the walls and the number of windows. They could never be held accountable to remember which window it was, which house it was. So help us, help you, Rahab. Get the scarlet thread thrown out the window and get your family inside the house. Verse 20, we see the third stipulation. If you tell this business of ours, then we shall be free from the oath which you have made us swear. So here are the stipulations for Rahab to follow. Number one, very simple. Scarlet thread in the window has to be there or the deal is off. Number two, stay inside the house. You have to be in the house or the deal is off. And number three, you have to keep your mouth shut. Do not tell anyone, including the king, who knows that you know us, Tell no one about what we've come, what we've said. Nothing about the scarlet. Nothing about that we're going to save some people inside your house. Nothing. So those are the three stipulations. And Rahab agrees, if you see when we get to verse 21. Look in verse 21. And she said, according to your words, so be it. I'll do everything that we've agreed to a T. So she sent them away to the hill country, and they departed, and immediately she tied the scarlet thread in the window. Obedience. She tied the scarlet thread in the window. Verse 22 says they departed, they came to the hill country. Obedience. I mean, they're trusting Rahab. Not only did she hide them on the roof, but they're trusting Rahab with their lives again. How do they know that Rahab isn't going to tell the pursuers, go to the hill country, that's where they are? I mean, the faith and the trust in each other here, these two spies and Rahab, is incredible. I'm going to give you a thought that's not biblical. What I mean by that is you can't find this in the pages of the Bible. But there is speculation by Jewish rabbis that Rahab's husband Solomon, remember in the book of Matthew chapter 1, Solomon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. There is speculation, and it's only speculation, that Solomon was one of these two spies. Was he? Well, you can't say yes and you can't say no. She married a Jew. She married a Jew named Solomon. She was saved. She did all these things on the board here. She was saved. Her life was spared. And she married a Jewish man, and she's in the line of Jesus Christ. The spy was a high-ranking member of Israel. Joshua didn't pick just anyone for this mission. So could it be? Could it be? I'll just say, could it be? Could it be that Solomon, Rahab's husband, was one of these spies? The answer is, of course, yes, it could be. There was great trust, and great trust built between what happened in this story. So they set out. They departed, they came to the hill country and remained there for 3 days, which is exactly what Rahab told them to do, stay for 3 days. They stayed until the pursuers, it says, until the pursuers returned. Now the pursuers had sought them all along the road, but had not found them. So the spies are safe. Rahab saved them. Verse 23, it says, then the two men returned. So they come back to Joshua now. They've done their job. They returned. They came down from the hill country. They crossed over the Jordan River, and they came to Joshua, the son of Nun, and they related to him all that had happened to them. Told him the whole story about Rahab and the pursuers coming and being hidden in the roof, and about the deal they made with Rahab for the scarlet thread and etc. We're going to save her family. They told Joshua everything. And they also told him this: surely the Lord has given all the land into our hands. Confidence. Surely the Lord has given all the land into our hands. Moreover, the inhabitants of the land have melted away from us. What a distinctly different report that these two spies gave than the 12 spies gave 40 years earlier. Do you remember what their report was? What a distinctly different report. 40 years have gone by, and these two spies say, God has given us the land, and God has made the people fearful. Joshua, let's go. We're behind you. 40 years earlier, in Numbers chapter 13, their fathers. Don't forget who these men are. These were these spies' fathers who said, the people who live in the land are strong. These were the 12 spies that went in and the 10 spies that came back. Joshua was one of these spies, but he wasn't afraid. Neither was Caleb. But the 10 spies had this report: the people who live in the land are strong. What do they say this time? They've melted before us. They're weak. They're not any shorter. They're not weaker. They're just afraid of us now. The people who live in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Has that fact gone away? Or is Jericho still fortified and very large? I just described the double wall to you. Nothing has changed except the heart of the people. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. These are the giants. And we are not able to go up against this people, for they are too strong for us. So the 10 spies, fearful for their lives, lost their lives in the wilderness over the next 40 years because of this cowardly report. And now we see in the book of Joshua chapter 2, these 2 spies say, let's go. I don't care how big the cities are. It didn't even mention the size of the city. It's obvious how big the city is. It's right over there on the hill. They're not afraid of that fortified city. They're not afraid of the size of the walls. They're not afraid of the people. Not afraid of anything. Joshua, let's go. So what's Joshua's response? In Joshua chapter 3, in verse 1, then Joshua rose early in the morning. Now we're talking about the very next morning. A man of action. Joshua rose early in the morning, and he and all the sons of Israel set out from Shittim and came to the Jordan River, and they lodged there before they crossed. What does Joshua do? He gets the intel from the spies. He doesn't like Gideon did, put out fleece. Lord, if you really want us to go, let the fleece be wet on the top, or dry on the bottom, or wet on the bottom, or dry on the top. And all this testing God, one test after another. Joshua got the intel, and the military leader said, tomorrow we set out. We're gone. We should have done it 40 years ago. And 40 years ago, me and my friend Caleb said, tomorrow we set out. But these 10 spies were cowards. Joshua, having been a spy 40 years ago, knew the intel of the spies was good, had been in that land himself, and said, in the morning we leave. It's a 7-mile trip, just a couple of facts from where they were in Shittim. About 7 miles to the banks of the Jordan River. That's the trip. They've lifted up the tabernacle. They've packed everything away. They're ready to move out by tribes, remember? All the tribes left in a very specific order. Remember also in chapter 2 that Joshua had told the people, get ready in 3 days. Get ready, for in 3 days we set out. It's been more than 3 days, but it's been within the week. So the men are ready, they're prepared. The people of Israel are ready. So it says in verse 2, at the end of 3 days, so they stayed at the banks of the Jordan River for 3 days. In verse 1, they move out from Shittim. They go to the banks of the Jordan River, and they're there for 3 days. At the end of 3 days, the officers, these are Jewish officers, they went through the midst of the camp, and they commanded the people, certainly at the words of Joshua, but they commanded the people, and this is what the leaders of Israel said. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, remember the ark? The ark in the Holy of Holies, the ark was the 36-inch long gold box of acacia wood that was lined inside and out with gold. It had poles run through it so that the members of Kohath, the family of Kohath, the Levites, could carry the ark of the covenant of the Lord. It's on top of the ark on the mercy seat where you had these 2 cherubims that their wings spread out and covered the mercy seat. Their wings touched each other in the middle. It's this ark that we're talking about, this piece of furniture. The holiest little piece of kit on all the earth is the Ark of the Covenant. But it's interesting that they are to follow the Ark. What did they used to follow? Keep reading. When you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God with the Levitical priests carrying it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. What did they used to follow? In verse 4 it says, however, there shall be between you and it, the ark, a distance of about 2,000 cubits. This is about 3,000 feet. 3,000 feet. How many feet are in a mile? 5,280 yards in a mile. Feet, I've got no idea. A bunch. I'm just trying to decide how far 3,000 feet is. It's a good distance. It's most of the way from here to Christian Corner over there. It's a good distance. There were a couple reasons for the distance. Why does it have to be all alone out there? Well, one obvious reason is because if it was too close, you couldn't see it. I mean, if I'm 10 feet behind the ark, that once you get a few feet back, this thing's going to get hidden in a mass of people. But if it's set way out there, you can see it and you can follow it. And it's also, the ark came to represent, because it's where God's presence was above the ark. It came to represent the very presence of God in the lives of the Jews. Yahweh was still leading. The ark that represented the presence of Yahweh was still leading Israel. I've asked you twice, I'll ask you again, what had the people of Israel followed for the last 40 years? The cloud. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. The pillar's gone now. The pillar's gone. They followed the pillar for 40 years. They left Egypt following this pillar of cloud by day and this pillar of fire by night. And now, as they're about to cross the Jordan River, no more pillar of cloud, no more pillar of fire. Look what it says in Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 19. Nehemiah speaking to God, he says, in your great compassion, you did not forsake them in the wilderness. You killed a lot of them, but you didn't kill all of them. You didn't abandon Israel in the wilderness. The pillar of cloud did not leave them by day to guide them on their way. Nehemiah makes clear the fact that the pillar of cloud was their guide. It's what they followed. Nor the pillar of fire by night to light for them the way in which they were to go. They followed the pillar so they'd know where to go. God led them. And even though the pillar is gone, God still leads them. But He's leading them with the ark of the covenant of the Lord now. Not the pillar, the ark, carried on the backs of these Kohathites, these Levitical priests. So that's what's going on here. The pillar's gone. So in verse 5, Joshua says to the people, consecrate yourselves. Now I'll show you in just a minute what consecrate means, but this is a worship word. This is a word that means purify yourselves. Now you would think that a military leader about to go into military battle would be saying something like sharpen your swords. But Joshua doesn't focus on the implements of war. Joshua focuses on the soul and the relationship of a man with God. Joshua says, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Now, you've read, just like I've read, you've read the whole story along with me from Joshua 1 all the way to Joshua chapter 3, verse 5. What has God told Joshua so far that it seems like Joshua knows something no one else does? Joshua says, tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Has God told Joshua anything yet about what He's going to do? Not a word. He hasn't said anything about what's going to happen. Now picture the scene again. Joshua's got 2 million Jews about on the banks of a Jordan River. The river has raised, it's risen because of the time of year. He's got cattle, uncountable cattle. He's got huge flocks of sheep, huge flocks of goat. He's got men and women and little children that he's got to get over a swollen river. And the people have been looking at this river for 3 days now. And I bet the people are saying, how are we going to get across that river? I wonder what the thoughts of the Israelis are, because you know they're so trusting of Yahweh. That's sarcasm. I wonder in these 3 days what the people of Israel were thinking about that Jordan River. Look what it says concerning the river in verse 15 of this same chapter. For the Jordan overflows all its banks all the days of harvest. So the river here is about 300 or 400 feet long, wide, 300 or 400 feet instead of its normal 100, 150 feet wide. So it's spread out because of all the extra water. It's springtime. The Mount Hermon snows have melted, have come down the Jordan River Valley. And the river valley is flooded. He says it. The Jordan overflows its banks all the days of harvest. The Jordan River here is estimated to be between 10 and 12 feet deep. We're not walking across this river. We're swimming across this river. Remember, 2 million Jews, men, women, and little kids, cattle, flocks, herds, and what else? What's the most holy thing in all of Israel? The tabernacle. The tabernacle. They've got to get the worship center of Yahweh across this river. How do you do it? Joshua says, I know a God. He doesn't know anything new. God hasn't told him a thing yet, but what Joshua does have is a historical memory. I know this God, and I'm telling you that in the morning He will do wonders among you, Israel. I don't know what He's going to do, but I do remember there was a day when He parted the Red Sea and all Israel crossed on dry ground. You know how I remember? Because I walked across the Red Sea on dry ground. My feet crossed the river. I've seen God do the impossible when Israel was up against a water. What do you call it in golf? What do you call the water pit? There's a word for it. A hazard. A hazard. Just a little hazard. To God, this is no hazard at all. This is nothing to the Lord. And that's all Joshua knows. He knows that this God is capable of doing anything. Is He going to harden the water so we can walk on the surface of the water? He could do that too. Is He going to dry it up? He could do that too. Whatever He's going to do, it's going to be miraculous, because in the morning all Israel will cross this river. That's what Joshua knows. And that's all he knows. His language here, tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you, harkens back to what Moses said in Exodus chapter 14, verse 13, when he was up against the Red Sea. Remember what Moses told the people, do not fear. Same thing Joshua was saying. Stand by and see the salvation of Yahweh, which He will accomplish for you today. That's the exact same thing Joshua just said. His friend Moses said it 40 years earlier. Watch God save. And Joshua is saying it today. Now the situation is different. Because in Moses' day, Israel needs to cross the water to flee a battle that they don't want to have. They don't want to fight the Egyptians. They never could. They would have been slaughtered. So in Moses' day, God does this miracle of salvation to free Israel from having to fight a battle. And in Joshua's day, just the opposite is true. Israel needs to cross the water to go into battle. A quote about Joshua and what he knows and what he doesn't. Because he doesn't know anything different than anybody else knows. By the way, George Bush there, maybe that name is familiar to you Americans. Not the same guy. This George Bush lived in the 1850s. I put the date on there so you'd know. He wrote a book called Notes on Joshua in 1852. It was published. But this comes from George Bush. He says, duty often calls us to take one step without knowing how we shall take the next. What's the one step Joshua was taking? He sent the spies in. He's heard the report back. He says, Israel, arise. He takes them from Shittim, and they go to the banks of the Jordan River. And what does Joshua do there? He waits. He waits, because until God does something miraculous, we can't get across that river. He waits. 3 days so far. But he's taken the first step, has no idea what the next step is. Duty often calls us to take one step without knowing how we shall take the next. But if brought thus far by the leadings of providence or God, if God has brought us to this step, He will take us the rest of the way. If brought thus far by the leadings of providence, and while engaged in His service, we may safely leave the event to Him. Lord, how are you going to save us? Doesn't matter to you, Joshua. You act in faith and you get the people to the river. That's what he did. He has no idea what's going to happen. God has not told him yet what's going to happen. So on this occasion, that's exactly what Joshua did. He expected a miracle from Yahweh. Tomorrow you will see the Lord do wonders among you. He expected a miracle in the morning. Because Yahweh said we're going into the promised land. Yahweh knows the river. Yahweh knows it's a worse river to cross than at any other time in the year. But you watch Yahweh do what He was going to do. Consecrate. I told you before, why would a military leader be concentrating on spiritual things when his army is about to have to go into battle? Joshua says, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Be ready when God moves. That's what he's saying to them. When God lifts His hand and moves on earth, you be ready. You be ready to stand in the presence of Almighty God, because tomorrow He will be here and do something stupendous. Kadosh is the word kadosh, and it means to be holy. It means to make holy, or to be holy and purified, ready to stand in the presence of Yahweh. Joshua expects God to be there and do something big in the morning. And he tells his people the most important thing of all this is to be ready to stand in the presence of Yahweh tomorrow. We would maybe make it a little more Americanized and say getting one's attitudes and actions right with Yahweh. Make sure you're purified. Make sure you're ready to stand in the presence of God. I would say, like I say to my kids, make sure you're in fellowship. Make sure you're in fellowship when you do this. Make sure you're in fellowship. Make sure you have no unconfessed sins. Make sure you're in a right relationship with God, so when He moves, you can appreciate and worship Him through it. It's exactly what Joshua says. So the question comes back to Joshua as the military commander of Israel. Why is his first command, purify yourselves spiritually? Why isn't his command, sharpen your swords, make sure all your implements of war are ready? It's the least of his concern. It's his concern, no doubt. He's an army leader. But the biggest concern is the spiritual preparedness of his people. Spiritual preparedness is more important than physical preparedness. You can't have one without the other, but one clearly comes first. You have to be right with God. So Joshua says, Kadosh, consecrate yourselves. The victory that Israel is seeking in the land of Canaan comes only at the hand of Yahweh. Yahweh decides when Israel has the victory. Yahweh then, getting right with Yahweh is the most important preparation. Steadying their relationship with Yahweh is the most important thing they can do as they enter into battle. If the battle depends on Yahweh, if success in the battle depends on Yahweh, don't you think you need to be right with Yahweh? Yes. And so Joshua goes to the spiritual first. This great military leader, Joshua the son of Nun, instead of commanding his troops something that you may think he would command about their implements of war and their preparedness physically, he commands his troops to purify themselves and to focus their attentions on Yahweh and the splendor of Yahweh that's going to come in the morning. And you could teach that for hours, and they say the Old Testament is irrelevant. You could teach Joshua 1, 2, and 3 for hours, for days, for weeks. You could glean information and great spiritual truths from the book of Joshua. And they say that Old Testament, it's just irrelevant. Unbelievable. Joshua spoke to the priests, still not knowing what's going on. Joshua spoke to the priests and he said, take up the Ark of the Covenant. Move out. Take up the Ark of the Covenant and cross over ahead of the people. If I was the priest, the Kohathite, in 10 or 12 foot of water, carrying this thing that's solid wood and coated with gold, who knows how much the Ark of the Covenant weighed? I'm looking at that water and thinking, what? What do you mean cross over ahead of the people? But the priests didn't hesitate either. They took up the Ark of the Covenant and they went ahead of the people, still not knowing anything. Remember, a 3,000 foot difference between the Ark of the Covenant with the priests, the Kohathites carrying it, and all of Israel, a 3,000 foot difference. So that it takes time for them to walk that distance. I'm sure it was a very solemn, slow gait as they're walking forward. And now, as Joshua in complete faith tells the priests, move out, just in time, Yahweh says, this is how we're going to do this. What a man, Joshua. What a leader of men. Trust God at all costs. Fear Yahweh is exactly what Joshua did. And now Yahweh comes to Joshua. Now the Lord said to Joshua, this day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. You shall moreover command the priests who are carrying the Ark of the Covenant, saying, when you come to the edge of the waters of the Jordan, stand still in the Jordan. And we have to pick up there next time with just what it is that God has up His sleeve. I've told you before that the waters of the Jordan River were parted 3 times, and we're about to see one of the partings. Just in time, as the Jewish priests march out implement the Ark of the Covenant, the most holy thing in all of Israel, as they march out with this thing, not having a clue how this is going to work, God just in time gives the information. I'm going to save all of you. It's going to be awesome. We'll pick up there next time. Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you for the time you've given us to look into your word. Just thank you, Lord, for your magnificent plan. We have a lot of prayer requests, Lord. We have a lot of unspoken requests that are very personal. And I have faith in you, Lord, and I know that we all do. But please strengthen our faith in you. Give us courage in you and trust in you, that when it's time, and just in time, that's often when you answer prayers. There's so much to learn from these Old Testament books. Father, thank you for this look into the life of Joshua and again the life of Rahab. 2 wonderful, obedient people in your plan. Father, please keep us safe as we go into our second time of worship. We ask all these things this morning in Jesus' name. Amen.